turn off the it's gonna wear me down. I'm gonna turn off the in-game sound. I'm gonna fall asleep.
Nightmarish display. With the crime scene so chaotic and dispersed, nobody really knew what to make of this situation. I mean, it was clear that someone had died from an explosion, but could it possibly have been an accident? Sadly, the answer was no, because upon closer inspection, very evident signs of foul play were revealed. This was certainly a case of homicide. It was later revealed that the victim had been shot twice before being stuffed full of explosives. And tragically, it was not those 2 bullets that killed them. So, what was the story behind this gruesome scene? Because whoever the victim was, they must have found themselves on the wrong side of some very powerful people. Put quite simply, civilians do not have access to this sort of weaponry. It became clear that the explosive residue collected at the crime scene was from explosives usually used by the military. To be exact, the residue was confirmed to belong to pentaerythritol tetranitrate and cyclotrimethylene trinitratamine, which were defined as explosives under the Firearms Act of 1957 and are typically found in C4. Despite the lack of facial features to help verify the body, forensics were able to use bone fragments to narrow down
Is that her
potential
spine?
victims.
Holy shit.
And soon enough, DNA analysis sadly confirmed that the body belonged to Altantuya Sharabu. Following the news, 2 officers were swiftly arrested in connection to the case. That being Corporal Cyril Umar, aged 35, and Chief Inspector Azala Hadri, aged 30. It is worth highlighting here that Hadri was the man that Abdul hired to fix his little blackmail problem. Now, both Umar and Hadri were part of the Special Actions Unit, an elite Malaysian task force renowned for its specialized capabilities. And beyond their roles in their SAU, they maintained affiliations with high-ranking Malaysian politicians. They had even previously served as security personnel for the former Prime Minister Abdullah Ahmed Badawi. So, these 2 men were well-trained, well-trusted, and knew how to keep their mouths shut. And if there were ever 2 men that were perfect for this job, it would likely be these 2. With this in mind, all Abdul had to do now was sit back in his estate and let these men do the dirty work. How lucky for him that his clandestine affairs could now be managed effortlessly without any direct involvement. However, what Abdul did not know was that a mere few hours before her disappearance, Altantuya herself had reported the entire affair to the authorities. Aware of how powerful her enemies were, she told the police that, if she were to go missing, the first person they should investigate should be Abdul Baginda. You see, in the days before reporting herself to the authorities, Altantuya suspected that she was being followed. At first, she noticed the same car around her home, parked around the corner or up the block by her house. And then it became more prominent. People were following her to work, to the shops, and then back home. As the intrusive surveillance became increasingly obvious, Altantuya recognized the urgency of seeking help. She knew that she was dealing with a powerful and corrupt political faction here, and quite understandably was terrified of the consequences. And this awareness extended beyond Altantuya herself. Even her family knew that Abdul was terrible news, and before officers could even ask, they gave his name up. So, the question is, what led Altantuya to this lonely forest where her life was then tragically ended? It turns out that, on the night before her death, she was actually on the way to Abdul's house already to negotiate some sort of resolution. However, when she arrived, she would not actually meet her ex-lover. Instead, she met his 2 henchmen, who then put her in the back of a car and escorted her away, for her to never be seen alive again. Now with an active investigation in progress, law enforcement pursued every lead they could find. And of course, the political party behind this wanted nothing to do with it. And finally, several weeks after the grim discovery of her body, 3 arrests were finally made. That being Abdul Baginda and his 2 henchmen. A pivotal moment in the investigation unfolded when a key witness intimately connected to the case stepped forward. Bala Subramaniam, also known as Bala, was a private investigator hired by Abdul to keep a close eye on Altantuya. And boy, did he emerge with some rather controversial news. Bala claimed that the police had been withholding crucial information on the case, and that, furthermore, he was prepared to reveal everything that he knew. Bala also claimed that not only did the Prime Minister know Altantuya, but he also had a sexual relationship with her too. Bala also revealed conversations with Abdul about his relationship with Altantuya. He claimed that he had inherited her from Najib, who passed her on because he wanted to avoid controversy while he geared up to become Deputy Prime Minister. It was also revealed that Abdul had sought Najib's advice after his trip to France with Altantuya, this implying that Najib was aware of the blackmail and the impending murder case. These allegations were highly inflammatory, and of course painted two very powerful men negatively. And that evening, when questioned about his involvement in the case, Prime Minister Najib Razak strongly denied ever knowing Altantuya, and even claimed that he had never personally met the woman. Abdul simultaneously denied having any inappropriate involvement with Altantuya, and furthermore, he corroborated his story with Najib, claiming he had never actually had any involvement with the girl. Which is quite the statement when you think about it. I mean, receipts and witness accounts all say otherwise. In a sudden turn of events, and not even 24 hours after making his first statement, Bala would then suddenly retract it, and make a new statement to say that his first one was not truthful and entirely made up. In response, and in his new statement, he completely absolved both Najib and Abdul of their involvement with Altantuya, essentially getting both of them off the hook. And perhaps no surprise, but shortly after this, he was then reported as missing to the police, because, put quite simply, he had vanished off the face of the earth. Many rumours started to circulate after this, but what was quite obvious is that this man faced extreme pressure from some very powerful people, and whether his disappearance was voluntary or not, he was now firmly out of the spotlight. And it also appeared that, despite all of the evidence stacked against him, Abdul was actually going to get away with the murder of Altantuya with no legal consequence. And in 2008, he was acquitted of all charges. And although the prosecution said that they would appeal, this never actually happened in the end. However, Abdul's henchmen, Cyril Umar and Azala Hadri, were not so lucky. Someone needed to take the fall, after all. And so, on April the 9th, 2009, the High Court judge ruled that they were to be tried and sentenced for Altantuya's murder. Both men were eventually found guilty, with them being sentenced to death by hanging for their crimes. And as their sentences were read out, both men looked onward with a blank and soulless face. Both Cyril Umar and Azala Hadri appealed their sentences, and surprisingly, 4 years later, in 2013, both men were suddenly acquitted of all crimes. That meaning that not only were their lives spared, but both men were also now free to go. Many justifications were given for this, including a lack of personal motive for the murder and insufficient witness testimonies. And while this may have been seen as a win for the politicians of Malaysia, the country's people were enraged by the decision. I mean, people always knew that politicians in their country were corrupt, but this was simply unbelievable to them. Like a strange game of ping pong, the prosecution was immediately back on the case, appealing the acquittal to the federal court. And on January the 13th, 2015, the federal court overturned that acquittal, finding both men guilty of murder for the second time. However, during this appeal, it became rather obvious that one of the most important people to this case was now missing, as their second man, Cyril, was nowhere to be found. It appeared that Cyril had fled the country, to Australia of all places. An Interpol notice was issued, and several days later, he was arrested by Brisbane's authorities. The Malaysian authorities requested to extradite him back to Malaysia so he could face his penalties. However, this was actually made impossible due to Australia's own quirky legal system. Now, this is something that I actually found quite interesting, but as it turns out, anyone who's been given a death sentence is actually protected by Australian law, and that, furthermore, they cannot face extradition out the country. Stuck in Australia, Cyril sat in the Villawood Immigration Detention Centre, safe from his fate back in Malaysia. And feeling less pressure now that he was away from the country that convicted him, he began offering his own side of the story to journalists. During his detention, Cyril Azar claimed that, although he had been instructed to carry out the killing of Altantuya, her actual killers were actually still at large. He further claimed that he and Azila Hadri were not selected for the job, and instead, they were made to be scapegoats. While Cyril was held in Australia, Azila Hadri continued to appeal his sentencing in Malaysia, and his legal counsel provided pivotal insights into the night of Altantuya's death. It was alleged that the explosives used in the murder were not within the federal police inventory, and that, furthermore, records indicated that Azala Hadri had only been issued a pistol. And despite their extensive military background, both men were untrained in the use of deadly explosives or bombs. Abdul openly denies any and all allegations, and to this day, both Cyril and Azala maintain their innocence, consistently asserting that their involvement in the murder was less than what they were convicted of. To this day, Cyril still walks the streets as a free man. This is because it was ruled that the indefinite detention of asylum seekers is unlawful in Australia, and so he remains out of custody in Australia to this day. But Azala Hadri is not so lucky. His second appeal was overturned, and he remains guilty in Malaysia. And so, to this day, he sits on death row in a cell in Malaysia, awaiting his execution by hanging. It looks like it's one of those moments where Cyril was one step ahead of the game here, and the exact details of who was there when Altantuya was murdered, or indeed who is responsible for pressing the button, remains unknown. All that we do know is that Altantuya was unfortunate enough to find herself in the middle of a very sticky political situation, one that was filled with lies, smoke and mirrors, and corruption. She was thrust into an uncomfortable situation before she knew it, was bribed and lied to, used, and then murdered. Altantuya was beautiful, intelligent, and driven, and towards the end of her life, she was finding success in an occupation that she loved. But tragically, she unwittingly crossed paths with the wrong individuals, and this resulted in her losing her life in the most brutal of ways. To this day, Abdul lives consequence-free for what he allegedly did to Altantuya, and he stands as an example of what can happen when you cross someone with all the power and none of the consequences. Quite a sensitive, controversial, and very political case when we think about it. But yeah, I think that pretty much wraps up our case today, folks. As always, I'd like to know what you think about...
Interesting.
With loneliness, frustration, and a burning hatred towards all women, George Sodini was an intelligent man with compromised social abilities. While he mainly remained normal throughout his younger years, George eventually found himself to be involuntarily celibate through his 30s and 40s. The more he craved female affection, the more he made women around him feel uncomfortable, and eventually, this tension turned into bitterness. As a result, George vented his anger and isolation on his website, and would even create videos discussing his emotions and a tour of his own home in the hope of attracting a soulmate. Despite these videotapes and posts being made public, no one would see it until it was all too late, and the consequence to this would be absolutely catastrophic, leaving 3 others dead and a total of 9 others injured. But who precisely was George Sodini? Why was it so difficult for him to find love? And how would this frustration manifest itself into chaos? Welcome back to Coffee House Crime, folks. My name is Adrian, and today we're looking at the very disturbing world of George Sodini. Now, George was a very intelligent man, but clearly had many socially awkward tendencies, which pretty much put all women off of him. And as you'll see, his isolation over time turned into bitterness, which resulted in the deaths of 3 innocent women. By the way, if you're new here, Coffee House Crime is all about true crime, strange and chilling stories, so if you want to support me in the channel, please consider subscribing. And another quick note, but I'm rather under the weather this week, so apologies for the performance. Anyway folks, with all that said, please grab yourself a coffee, pull up a seat and get ready for the deep dive. This is the case of George Sodini.
Getting tired now. I wanna go to bed. What time is it? It's 10:30.
Welcome to Pennsylvania, folks. Home to almost 13 million residents, the coal state can be found near the eastern coastline of the United States. As the 6th largest state in GSP, Pennsylvania would technically have the 22nd largest economy in the world if the state were a country. With a rather dominant footprint in banking, manufacturing, and agriculture, it's also a strong new contender in the gambling and film industries. Moving forward, although Philadelphia tends to take the spotlight in Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh is just as well known in the area. With a population of 300,000, its economy focuses on healthcare, higher education, and fintech, which is rather fitting for this case, as one of those working in the fintech sector was a troubled man named George Sodini. Now, from the outside, George looked like a typical man. At a height of 5'10", 155 pounds, and in shape for his age, he was a salaryman who worked for a local law firm and owned his own home. But sadly, as many of you will know, demons can exist in one's mental health, and they are seldom seen from the outside. So, let's start from the very beginning here. George Alfred Sodini was born on September the 30th, 1960, and grew up as part of a family of 5. And although his life at school was relatively average, things were not so functional at home. According to him, his mother was a vicious, vindictive woman who was into power and control. And as for his father, he was apparently useless. He never talked to him or had a real relationship with his children, and this angered George quite considerably. Here is one important fact to make in light of this video, but George did have some success with women as a teenager. However, he would also claim that his brother did often try to embarrass him in front of other girls. So, although we don't actually know what his family were like, it is clear that George did not have a great perspective on his family. Nevertheless, things seemed to be going smoothly for him in his younger adult years. He had multiple partners, a comfortable job, and was getting by just fine. But saying that, as we move forward to the year 2008,
After this
you will
let's go.
see just how much that
I'm
changed.
gonna go to bed. I'm tired now.
So, where do I begin with George as a man in his 40s? In short, by the year 2008, George had become a bitter man filled with loneliness, self-loathing, and misogyny. And, unfortunately, these 3 emotions will steer the rest of our story today. George had become a very isolated man, unable to find love or even a sexual partner. He really desperately craved affection, yet was never able to find it. In fact, he even admitted that he hadn't had sex for over 18 long years, and hadn't slept next to a woman overnight since 1982. That being 26 years prior. And this loneliness was ingrained into George's moods, mental health, self-identity, everything, to be honest.
Yes.
And over the following months, he became increasingly vocal about it. Beginning with George's outward appearance, he seemed to have absolutely everything together. As a systems analyst at his local law firm, K&L Gates, his responsibilities included analyzing and improving the performance of K&L's software. So he clearly was an intelligent guy. He was also known to attend the gym and regularly practice boxing in his basement. And the most recent images of him showed that he was in good shape with no unattractive facial features. George also owned his own home on Orchard Spring Road in Scott Township. Since buying this house for $79,000, it has almost tripled in value to an estimated $205,000 in the year 2023. He also had a new car on his driveway, so clearly the man was rolling in money. Before continuing our story, it is worth bringing up his home videos, because in his frustrated efforts to attract a woman, George made the decision to give the world his very own house tour, uploading his 4-minute video to YouTube. And it's here that we get to take a first glimpse into the awkward world of George Sodini.
This is my house from the street. Here is my car. This is a 2-bedroom brick ranch, conveniently located. My car is an 07 Altima. I paid $79,000 for this in 1996. That's considered a lot, believe it or not. Hey, we're approaching the door. Open it up.
That's a weird ass
Oh,
thing to
someone
do.
left it unlocked.
Go
That's
now,
not good.
dox yourself online.
Inside, okay. My big screen TV, 32-inch. It's my computer. Let me pan out a little bit. Computer is connected to the stereo, which I listen to my MP3s and everything else. Pan to the other side. Speakers on each side are large. They double as end tables.
Oh.
Okay, couch and chair, they match. The woman will really be impressed. Okay, come over here. There's some reading material that we're all familiar with.
It's worth mentioning here that this book, as seen on the table, is a copy of How to Date Young Women by the author R. Don Steele. Through this information, it is clear that George's loneliness and insecurity seemed bad enough for him to read books and research on how to date women.
Come out here through the dining room. I just bought this. Dining room set, rug, okay. Little hallway, 2 bedrooms. 2 bedrooms. To the right is my bedroom. Extra computer here, they're networked. I'll show you the Cat 5 connections downstairs.
Just to be picky here, I don't think any woman would be interested in Cat 5 Ethernet cables, George. However, this dialogue does highlight his peculiarity and socially awkward tendencies, which of course may eventually put women off.
Okay, looks pretty clean. I'm sure she'll be impressed. Now this back bedroom I use just for storage. There's a lot of junk here. You know, as we could see, bottles of cologne and spare change and shoebox full of old pictures and photographs and stuff. And come over here and there's CDs and all kinds of electronic gear I bought since joining the list. Tapes and so on. We pan out a little bit. Could take a quick walk through back here, through the living room, the hallway. Here's the kitchen. Stove and counter and everything I need. Just cleaned it up. All the cupboard space I need. Okay. I like here, you just come out here, there's a room with a view. My backyard and everything. Okay, let's go down the cellar.
George's home was both tidy and organized, with no telltale signs of a dysfunctional man. The weirdest part about all of this was the video itself, actually. It felt like he was advertising himself as a person, thus feeling rather uncomfortable to watch.
Well, that about sums it up.
Up until this point, George had mostly kept most of his thoughts and his feelings offline. But soon, that was all about to change. Now, if you remember that book found on his coffee table, that was written by a man named Ardon Steele. And this guy was not just an author, but also a dating guru. And this guy has some very abstract perspectives. He taught these men that all nice guys must die, that all women above the age of 30 are bitter, and that all women need men to take charge. And unfortunately, George was a devout follower of Steele. In fact, he was seen attending multiple seminars of his, which usually taught men how to greet and speak to women. It's a shame though that the narrative behind those lessons was so rotten. I'm not even kidding here. Watching these seminars felt like the old school version of Andrew Tate. I couldn't stomach watching all of it, but at one point, the advice given was to treat confident women like shit. Because apparently that's what they find attractive. Honestly, this stuff is garbage. During these videos, George could be seen aimlessly looking around during the workshops. I mean, he looked like a zombie in a work shirt, quite frankly. It was noted that he was reticent, shy, and reserved throughout these workshops. And although he was known to take many notes in class, he never actually loosened up with the women around him. As the months moved on, his frustration grew to unbearable levels. The man became an ever-contrasting figure of long-lasting hopelessness and fresh determination. George had no confidence in himself at all. But all the same, the ridiculous seminars and unrealistic books made him behave in ways which typically bore little success. And that is when he created and posted this video online, openly expressing his conflicted feelings of both hope and frustration.
It is easy for me to hide from my emotions for one more day. Take a long drive in the car, listen to some music, daydream, or just do some mundane task around the house that really doesn't need to be done, that's not too important. And there you go, one more day, and one more day turns into one more year. Now, RDS says that I have approximately maybe 15 more years to be successful at this. And when I heard that, I wanted to continue immediately to start moving on this. I didn't realize I had that much time. So,
no, you don't.
But my objective is to be real and to learn to be emotional and to be able to emotionally connect with people. Because when I'm 10 to 20 years older than she is, she has to feel good about this thing. And the only way around that, is to work on this. And perhaps STEM exercises or forgiveness exercises as per Hay or whatever else. I'm going to post this and see what comes back.
Despite his determination, George continued to scare women away. In fact, one of his most notable moments
Same.
happened inside of a church. Ever since March 2004, he'd been attending a local church, but as the years passed by, others in attendance noticed his strange behavior towards women. He was eventually asked to leave the congregation after he was harassing one of those attending. This woman described him as a very strange man with an unnerving smile who wouldn't stop staring. The police were ultimately called after George refused to leave the church. And, as you'll see later on in this video, this would be a day that he would not forget. Around this time, George opened his own blog under his domain of georgesodini.com. And although he was reserved in those workshops, he would really open up about his feelings and thoughts on his website. His first noteworthy post began on December the 22nd, 2008. In his blog, he wrote, "Time is moving along. Planned to have this done already. I will just keep a running log here as time passes. Many of the young girls here look so beautiful as to not be human. Very edible. After joining this gym, started lifting weights and like it. Much info about weight programs, diet, etc. on the web, or anything for that matter. Instead of TV, I can Google for many hours to relax. TV and most movies are dull. Sadly, it is clear that George's mental health deteriorated over the Christmas period. Over Christmas of 2008, he posted, "Moving into Christmas again. No girlfriend since 1984. Last Christmas with Pam was
Since
in 1983.
1984?
Who knows why?
This guy-
I'm not
this you
ugly
had
or
one.
too weird. No sex since July 1990 either. I was 29. No shit. Over 18 years ago. And did it maybe only 50 to 75 times in my life. Getting to think that a woman now would just get in the way of things. Isolated. I have extra money and enjoy traveling too, with my 25 to 30 days of vacation. LA was the best. But going alone was not too fun. Invited to a party on Christmas Day tomorrow. Seems about 15 to 25 people will actually show. I like her parties. I can meet new people and talk. Got the next 8 days off. I should have the exit plan done and practiced by then. I know that nothing will change, no matter how hard I try or what goals I set." And this is where I have to tell you what George precisely meant as an exit plan. Because, as you can likely guess, it wasn't the good kind. By now, George had convinced himself that he was destined to die alone and that he would never be intimate with a woman again. And so, with that in mind, he figured, why bother living? But George didn't plan to go quietly. Oh no. In fact, he'd become so enraged with other women and their decision to date other men that he wanted them to pay for his suffering. And so, this so-called exit plan was for George to head to the gym and then take out as many lives as possible before taking his own. On December the 28th, George posted on his online blog to say that he would shoot for Tuesday the 6th of January 2009. And remember, all of these posts were publicly visible. He then posted one day later saying, "I actually look good. I dress good, I'm clean shaven, bathe, touch of cologne. Yet 30 million women rejected me over an 18 or 25-year period. That is how I see it. 30 million is my rough guesstimate of how many desirable single women there are. And this type of life I see is a closed world with me specifically and totally excluded. Flying solo for many years is a destroyer. Yet many people say I am easy to get along with. Looking back, I owe nothing to desirable females who ask for anything except basic courtesy, usually." He would post again only 3 days later to honorably mention his family, removing the names and addresses for privacy. In this post, he describes his father as a useless sperm donor, his mother as dominant, and his brother as a bully. George also claimed in these honorable mentions that his pastor allegedly taught him that you can still go to heaven even after committing mass murder. I mean, suffice to say that this is categorically untrue, and was likely left in spite of making his pastor feel guilty after his exit plan. Side note, but he also mentioned his acquaintance Andy as a hypocritical idiot. On the day before his planned attack, he posted, "Tomorrow should be good. Life is just playing games. No matter how many changes I try to make, things always stay the same. I see 20-something couples everywhere. I think those years slipped right by for me. Why should I continue another 20+ years alone? I will just work, come home, eat, maybe do something, then go to bed alone for the next day of the
Story
same
of my
thing.
life.
I cannot wait for tomorrow." But the next day, George had a sudden change of heart at the very last moment. He posted on his blog once again to say, "It's 8:45 p.m. I chickened out. Shit. I brought the loaded guns. Everything. Hell." We can only assume that George reevaluated his life in those final moments before then going home and posting about it online, because after this, he would go radio silent for several months. This is probably because George realized that, surprise surprise, life wasn't actually that bad after all. He had a good job, was healthy, owned his own home, and went on holiday often. The only thing missing really was a partner. But in April of 2009, he posted that his company was sadly going through layoffs, and in his pessimistic attitude, believed that he would not survive the next one. Between April and August of that year, he would log an additional 14 entries to his diary. And yeah, I'm not going to read all of that out loud, as would be here all day, but here are the most noteworthy excerpts. April 24th. I predict I won't survive the next layoff. That is when there is no point to continue. Right now, life is bearable and I can get by indefinitely. Something bad must happen. The paycheck is all I have left. May the 4th. What is it like to be dead? I always think I'm forgetting something. That's one reason why I postponed.
I'm thinking
Similar
that
to when you
about that
leave to
every
get
day.
in your car to go somewhere, you hesitate with the thought, what am I forgetting? In this case, I cannot make a return trip. May the 18th. I actually had a date today. Women just don't like me. There are 30 million desirable women in the US, and I cannot find one. Not one of them finds me attractive. May the 29th, another lonely Friday night. I'm done. This is too much. June the 5th. I was reading several posts
Where
on
am I
different
supposed to do that?
forums, and it seems that many teenage girls have
hang on.
sex frequently. One 16-year-old does it usually 3 times a day with her boyfriend. So, after a month of that, this little hoe has had more sex than me in my entire life, and I'm 48. One more
Skill
reason.
issue.
Thanks for nada, bitches. Bye. On July the 20th, George commented about getting a promotion and a raise. But straight after this, he then immediately pivoted to talk about how bad the economy is, and how the man hasn't slept with a woman in over 20 years. Now,
that guy
this is a
you
very
problem,
important detail
not-
to realise. Despite previously
always
being
said it to
worried
myself.
about the layoff, the exact opposite happened to him with a promotion and raise in the end. But
Ow.
despite the positive change, he does not seem to care anymore. This means that George continuously focused on the negativities in his life, thus further
Suerte,
thrusting him into the
mamá,
darkness of his own mind. July 23rd. Wow. I just looked out of my front window and saw a beautiful college-age girl leave Bob Fox's house. I guess he got a good lay today. College girls are hoes. I masturbate frequently. He is about 45 years old. She was a long-haired, hot little hottie with a beautiful body. I masturbate frequently. Some were simply meant to walk a lonely path in life. Thanks, Mum and brother, and Dad, old man, for totally ignoring me through the years. All of you deeply helped me be this way. George never considered why a younger woman may have left his neighbour's home. He never contemplated if she were a colleague, family member, friend, saleswoman, or even another neighbour who had knocked on his door to complain. George was unable to look at anything in a positive manner. He assumed the absolute worst in every situation, especially when it came to women. These self-destructive tendencies likely stem from deep-seated self-confidence issues, which we already are familiar with. Either way, he did nothing to address these
Yes,
issues with a
Spectre's
therapist
gay is
or a
awesome.
psychologist.
That's great.
After attending ridiculous
One more.
alpha male workshops, he let his own thoughts consume him. And although he had backed out of his violent plans several months prior, he would tragically recommit to them in the summer of 2009. In his final written entry, which is dated August the 3rd, George said the following: I took off today and tomorrow to practice my routine and make sure it is well polished. I need to work out every detail here. There is only one shot. Also, I need to be completely immersed into something before I can be successful. I haven't had a drink since Friday at about 2:30. Total effort needed. Tomorrow is the big day. Maybe soon I will see God and Jesus. At least that is what I was told. Eternal life does not depend on works. If it did, we would all be in hell. I will try not to add any more entries, because this computer clicking distracts me. Also, any of the practice papers left on my coffee table are used, or the notes in my gym bag can be published freely. I will not be embarrassed. because, well, I will be dead. Death lives. It is almost unbelievable that these journal entries were publicly visible for more than 9 months on his website. Although it's unclear how much traffic this website received in those 9 months,
Probably
it was
0.
evident early on that George posed a risk to human life. What I do find quite odd is that, even in his final journal, he almost sounded like he was forcing himself to go ahead with these plans, talking about avoiding distractions and remaining focused. But George was fully convinced this time. And tragically, the very next day, on August the 4th, 2009, he travelled to his gym and executed his plan. On the morning of this fateful day, George travelled to the Great Southern Shopping Centre in Collier Township. He entered the gym at around 11 AM, just to leave it shortly after. Returning in the evening, he headed to a local restaurant just across the parking lot. At 7:40 PM, he then re-entered the gym before once again leaving, and that is when he called his mum, of all people. This phone call remained civil, and George allegedly expressed no intention to harm or kill anyone. Shortly before 8 PM though, the call was over. He then returned to LA Fitness, entering the gym at 7:56 PM. Now, it's unclear what he did for the next 18 minutes, but at 8:14 PM, he travelled to the far left of the gym's first floor and entered the aerobics room. During this time, the room was filled with members taking a yoga class. George then placed the duffel bag down on the ground, turned the lights off, took out 2 handguns, and then began firing into the crowd of 20 people. A total of 52 shots were fired with 2 Glock semi-automatic pistols, with all of these shots being reported to last for just over 1 minute. People outside of the aerobics room soon caught on to what was happening. In a panic, many fled through the front door and fire exit, and witnesses recall hearing dozens of pops and screams. Moments later, he pulled out a .45 caliber revolver and took his own life. When the police entered the gym, they would find his body over that weapon. Officers also found a 4th handgun in his pocket and a handwritten note in his duffel bag. And although it's not clear what this note said, it apparently did not outline his intention to take his own life. Witnesses would later recall seeing George striding to that classroom with absolute confidence, and it's believed that he targeted that classroom because it was filled with women. And sadly, this tragedy would result in the deaths of 3 of those women, with an additional 9 injured and 5 of those being critically injured. Thankfully though, all 9 would go on to make a full recovery.
That's good.
Miracles aside, it was all too late for 3 of these women. Heidi Overmeyer, age 46,
Oh, shit.
Elizabeth Gannon, age 49, and Jodie Billingsley, age 37. Heidi Overmeyer was a sales manager at a local amusement park. Growing up in West Mifflin, she was the youngest of 5 children, and neighbours described her as the best you could ever have. This left a lot of pain for her son Ian, who tragically passed away just last year in a motorcycle accident. Elizabeth Gannon loved to exercise and walk a golden retriever. Friends say that she never had a bad day and was always friendly to people. Working as an X-ray technician, colleagues described her as a wonderful, caring person whose smile would brighten the day of her patients. She loved people and would always do right by them. Jodie Billingsley was in medical supply sales. She was a health enthusiast and was often seen biking or running in the hills surrounding her home. She is remembered as a very sweet person by her friends and family. Tragically, she is the 3rd one to be added to the list of 3 women who were murdered by the tormented delusions of a lonely, psychopathic man.
Approximately 8:16 p.m. this evening, Collier Township Police were alerted to an active shooter at the LA Fitness in the Great Southern Shopping Center. We have 4 confirmed deceased. We have at least 10 wounded in various hospitals throughout the area.
I just was upstairs on an elliptical machine, just doing some running, and just heard all these shots. Just heard a whole bunch of noise, and everybody just was yelling, "Get down, get down!" And got outside, and there was about 4 women that had been shot. We just tried to help them the best that we could when we got outside.
There's a good belief that the shooter is deceased.
On August the 6th, 2009, approximately 75 people, including friends, women's rights advocates and local officials held a vigil at the Pittsburgh City Council building in downtown Pittsburgh. It is here that Jody, Elizabeth and Heidi were remembered for their impact on those around them. Shortly after the shooting, people across the world began to take notice of George Sodini's online blog, a website which had alluded to his plans for many months before the attack. No one had reported George's website to the police prior, so, although it may seem strange that his public blog hadn't been reported before it was too late, it is likely because his website accurately reflects himself, that being insufferably isolated and lonely. Nobody wanted him, his love, or his body, and although we all deserve to feel loved, let me tell you, it has to be earned and reciprocated correctly. It turns out though that not even his money was wanted. Just before his death, George bequeathed his $250,000 estate to the University of Pittsburgh, though after learning about his actions, they rejected the dead man's offer. It was later learned that he'd made many practice runs in the hours and days before the attack. He'd even asked one of the staff how to turn the lights off, though they didn't think anything of it, of course. And here's a rather ironic side note, but to begin with, authorities believed that the gunman was actually targeting an ex-girlfriend, which is kind of funny because he never had one. Concerningly, just days before the attack, someone had actually reported George after he pulled a grenade out of his bag while sitting on a bus. But by the time the authorities were alerted, he was long gone. This was very out of character and not something actually mentioned on his blog. But thank God that he'd reconsidered his actions. Of course, we don't know what would have happened if he went ahead with that instead, but the consequences could have been much, much worse. And yeah, I think that pretty much covers the case of George Sodini. A very twisted and disturbed man with some very big challenges going on in his mind. Before you go today, I'd like to know what you think about this case, because George is a very intriguing individual. Personally, I think he probably could have found a partner in the end, but the man clearly was very socially awkward and had many challenges to overcome. It's a shame that, instead of getting the right support, he went down rather unorthodox methods instead. I think this was a case.
I think considering that he is like a numbers guy, I assume that he's like losing a lot of hope because, you know, he's running out of time, he's getting old. It seems like that's why he's like, you know, desperate in some sense, you know. Damn. Guys, that's enough video for now. I'm going to bed. One last poll. I'm going to bed. I'm so tired.